The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stood silent as the emergency beacon flashed red across every display screen. Ambassador Jiu watched from Earth's observation deck as thousands of alien species gathered in panic. She had studied their languages for years, preparing for this moment, but nobody had prepared her for the fear in their eyes. The Vra Collective had destroyed 3 colony worlds in 2 weeks. Their ships moved like shadows through space, appearing without warning and leaving nothing behind. The Council's peacekeeping forces had tried to stop them. They failed. Every species that stood against the Vrax was crushed. Within days, Jiu stood beside Commander Hunu, a man who had spent 20 years preparing Earth's fleet for this exact scenario. His face remained calm, but his hands gripped the railing tight. Behind them, young officer Tammin reviewed tactical data on his tablet, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. They're talking about surrender, Tam said quietly. Half the council wants to negotiate with the Vrax. Hunu shook his head. Negotiation means slavery. The Vras don't make deals, they conquer. The council chamber erupted in arguments. Species that had lived in peace for centuries now turned on each other with accusations and blame. Some wanted to fight, others wanted to run. None of them seemed to have a real plan. Then an old alien stood up. His skin was blue and covered in scales, and his species had existed for over 50,000 years. He was called Elder VTH, and when he spoke, the entire chamber fell silent. There are old stories, Vayoth said slowly, ancient records that speak of a species called humans. The records say they came from a world of endless conflict. They knew nothing but war for thousands of years. The records say they were dangerous beyond measure. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some species laughed, others looked confused. Most had never heard these stories before. The humans disappeared 2,000 years ago, another ambassador said, if they even existed at all. Most scholars believe they were just myths, stories created to scare young ones. Vayoth turned toward the speaker. I have seen the records myself. Humans fought with a ferocity that terrified every species they encountered. They refused to surrender even when defeat was certain. They adapted to any situation and turned weaknesses into strengths. They were called the unkillable ones. Fairy tales. Someone shouted from the back, we need real solutions, not ancient myths. Jiu took a deep breath. She touched the communication panel on her wrist and sent a signal. The decision had been made weeks ago, but Earth had waited for the right moment. Now, with the council falling apart and the VRs advancing, that moment had arrived. The main display screen flickered. Every eye in the chamber turned toward it. A new signal appeared on the long-range sensors, then another, then 10 more, then 100. What is that? Someone whispered. The display showed a fleet emerging from the outer reaches of the solar system, ships of designs nobody recognized. They moved in perfect formation, their hulls painted with symbols of a blue and red circle surrounded by 4 black marks. Earth's flag. Hyansu pressed a button on the command console. His voice echoed through the council chamber. This is Commander Hunu of the Earth Defense Fleet. We have been monitoring your situation. Humanity offers its assistance against the Vrax Collective. The chamber exploded in chaos. Species jumped from their seats. Some screamed, others activated weapons. The ancient rumors had just become reality, and nobody knew if humans were here to help or to conquer. Elder Vayath stared at the screen with wide eyes. They're real, he breathed. The legends were true. Jiwoo walked toward the center platform where the council leaders sat. Guards moved to block her path, but she simply raised her hands to show she carried no weapons. Council's head administrator, a tall being made of crystalline structures, gestured for the guards to let her pass. I am Ambassador Jiwoo of Earth, she said. Clearly, my species has lived in isolation for 2,000 years. We left the galaxy because we were tired of war. We wanted peace. We wanted to build something better. She paused and looked at each council member, but we never forgot how to fight, and we will not stand by while innocent beings are slaughtered. How do we know you won't turn on us? A council member demanded. The old records say humans are dangerous. They say your kind knows only violence. Tam stepped forward. Records are wrong. We know violence. Yes, but we also know honor. We know sacrifice. We know what it means to stand together against impossible odds. He pulled up tactical displays showing the Vra advance. You need warriors. We are offering to be those warriors. The council leaders looked at each other. Fear and desperation weighed on their faces. They had no other options. Vras were coming, and every defense had failed. Finally, the head administrator spoke. The council will vote on this alliance. But first, you must prove yourselves. There is a colony world called Tanis 4. In the Outer Rim, the Vrax will attack it within 3 days. If humans can defend it, we will consider a full alliance. Hyunu smiled grimly. He knew a test when he saw one. We accept. Send us the coordinates. As Earth's delegation left the council chamber, Jiwoo heard the whispers starting. The ancient rumors were spreading again, but this time they came with fear and hope mixed. Together, humanity had returned to the galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same. Captain Donghun stood on the bridge of the reconnaissance ship Tuck and studied the colony world below. Tanis 4 looked peaceful from orbit. Green fields, blue oceans, and small cities scattered across 3 continents. 5 million civilians lived down there, completely unaware that they had become pawns in a galactic test. The council gave us bad intelligence, Chief Engineer, Sunhai said from her station. She pulled up the sensor data on the main screen. They said we'd face maybe 20 Vex ships. I'm reading signatures for over 200. Dong Hyun clenched his jaw. The council had set them up to fail. They wanted humans to prove themselves, but they also wanted to see humans break. Fear made people do stupid things, and the council was terrified of the ancient rumors coming true. How long until they arrive? Donghun asked. 6 hours, maybe less. The Chuk was a small ship with a crew of only 60. Earth had sent 2 other ships with them, but together they had maybe 10,000 personnel total against 200 Vrax warships. Those numbers meant nothing. This wasn't a test, it was an execution. Tam walked onto the bridge carrying a data pad. He had barely slept since they left Earth, spending every moment studying Vras tactics and battle records. I found something, he said. The Vras always attack the same way, overwhelming force, maximum aggression. They try to end battles in the first hour. That doesn't help us when they have 200 ships. Sunhai said it does if we use it against them. Tam pulled up a tactical map. They'll Come in hard and fast, they'll expect us to form a defensive line and try to hold. What if we don't? Dong Hun studied the map. You want to let them through. I want them to think we're running scared. Then we hit them where they don't expect it. Sun Hai leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she examined the asteroid field on the outer edge of the system. The mining asteroids, we could rig them with explosives. The council will accuse us of cowardice if we retreat, Dong Hun said. Tam smiled. Let them. We're not here to look brave. We're here to win. Tracked 5 hours later, the Vrax fleet emerged from hyperspace exactly where the humans predicted. Their ships were massive and dark, covered in weapons that glowed with red energy. The lead vessel was 3 times larger than any ship in Earth's fleet. Dong Haiyan watched from the bridge as his communications officer opened a channel. Vrax and LT Unk and GTS fleet, this is Captain Dong Haiyan of Earth. Withdraw now or face the consequences. The response came in a language that sounded like grinding metal. The translation appeared on screen. Primitive species, surrender or die. Typical. Sun Hai muttered. The Vra fleet accelerated toward the colony world. Earth's 3 ships sat in orbit, seemingly frozen in fear. The Vra commanders must have smiled when they saw only 3 vessels defending the planet. This would be easier than they thought. Then at the last possible moment, Earth ships scattered. They didn't retreat toward the colony. They moved into the asteroid field. The Vra fleet followed without hesitation. This was exactly what they expected. The weak species was running, and they would be destroyed among the rocks like insects. Dong Haiyan counted down silently. 3, 2, 1. Now, he said quietly. Sun Hai activated the charges. 50 asteroids exploded simultaneously, each one rigged with enough explosive to destroy a capital ship. But the real trick wasn't the explosions, it was what the explosions released. Millions of pieces of metal debris shot through space in calculated patterns. Sun Hai had spent days calculating the exact trajectories. The debris formed a cloud that wrapped around the Vra fleet like a net. Vra shields were designed to stop energy weapons and missiles. They weren't designed for clouds of metal shrapnel moving at thousands of kilometers per second. The debris tore through shield after shield, ripping into hull plating and destroying sensor arrays. 20 VR ships went dark immediately. 50 more took critical damage. The formation fell apart as ships tried desperately to avoid the debris field while also defending against Earth's counterattack. Tae Min led a squadron of fighters into the chaos. Human ships were smaller and faster than Vrax vessels, and in the debris field, that advantage became devastating. They struck like snakes, hitting damaged ships with precision weapons before vanishing back into the asteroids. The Vrax tried to regroup, but Dong Haiyan had already moved to the next phase. The Chuk emerged from behind a massive asteroid and fired its main cannon directly at the Vra flagships. Damaged section, the shot punched through the weakened hull and detonated inside the ship's reactor. The explosion lit up space like a small sun. When the light faded, half the Vra flagship was gone. The remaining Vra ships broke formation completely. Some tried to retreat, others charged forward in blind rage. Earth ships picked them off one by one, using the asteroids as cover and striking only when they had overwhelming advantage. 4 hours later it was over. 60 V ships destroyed, 70 more damaged and retreating. The rest had fled the system entirely. Dong Hun walked to the viewport and looked down at Tanny's 4. The colony world remained untouched. Not a single civilian had been harmed, not a single building destroyed. We lost one fighter, Sun Hai reported. Pilot ejected safely, no casualties on our side. Tin joined Dong Haiyan at the viewport. The council observers are requesting communication. They want to know how we did it. Tell them the truth. Dong Hun said, humans fight smart, not just hard. We adapt, we improvise, we win. Across the galaxy, the reports started spreading. The council had tried to watch humans fail, but instead they witnessed something that terrified them. Even more, the ancient rumors weren't exaggerated. If anything, they didn't go far enough. Humanity had returned to war, and they remembered every lesson they had ever learned. News of the Tannies' 4 victories spread across the galaxy in days. Some species celebrated. Others grew more afraid, but everyone now knew one thing for certain: humans were real, and they knew how to fight. Commander Hunu watched the intelligence reports come in from his command center. On Earth, the Vrax Collective wasn't retreating. They were preparing for something bigger. Intelligence officer Jung stood beside him, pointing at tactical displays that showed VRA and LT, UNC and GT. Fleet movements, they're pulling back forces from every conquered system. Jung said 300 ships, maybe more, there, gathering for a major strike. Where? Hunu asked. Jung highlighted a star system on the map. Sol, Earth's home system. They're coming for us. They want to eliminate the threat before we can organize the council into real resistance. Hunsu nodded slowly. He had expected this. The Vrax conquered through fear, crushing opposition quickly before resistance could spread. Humanity represented something they couldn't allow to exist. Hope. How long do we have? 2 weeks, maybe less. Special Forces Commander Yumi entered the command center carrying her tactical gear. Her team had just returned from a training exercise, but the news had reached them immediately. We need to take the fight to them, she said. If we wait for them to attack, we fight on their terms. Council won't support an offensive operation. Jung said they're too afraid. They want us to defend their worlds, not start a war. Young Mi laughed bitterly. The war already started. The Vrax just haven't told the council yet. Wei Hunu looked at the star map for a long moment. Every tactical instinct he had learned over 20 years told him Young was right. Defense meant slow death, but attacking meant risking everything humanity had built. Yong Haiyan Su said, finally, show me everything you know about Vrax and LT, UNC and GT's military structure. Over the next week, Jung compiled every piece of information Earth's intelligence network had gathered. The Vrax Collective operated through fear, an overwhelming force. They had never faced an enemy that fought back hard enough to hurt them. Every species that resisted was crushed within days, which taught the galaxy one lesson: resistance was pointless. But Jae Sung found something interesting in the old records. Thousands of years ago, the Vrax had lost a war. The records were vague and mostly destroyed, but they mentioned a species that refused to surrender, species that adapted and fought with creativity instead of just strength. The records called them, it was humans. Jae Sung told Haiyan Su, our ancestors fought the Vras thousands of years ago. That's why they disappeared from known space. The Vraz tried to exterminate them, but humans survived by running away and hiding. The Vraks thought they succeeded, and now we're back, Hayanu said quietly. That's why they're so desperate to destroy us. They know what happens if we're allowed to spread resistance. Vrak's fleet arrived at Earth's solar system 12 days later. 300 warships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapons charged immediately, painting Earth's defensive platforms with targeting systems. Hunu watched from the command center as the enemy fleet approached. Earth's defenses looked pitiful in comparison. 50 ships, orbital platforms, and ground-based weapons against 300 VR warships. It seemed hopeless, but Hunu had learned from Dong Hun and LT Unk and GT's victory at Tannis 4. Numbers didn't matter if you fought smart. Activate the stealth fields, he ordered across the solar system. 30 ships that had been hidden behind planets and asteroids disappeared from VRA sensors. Earth's stealth technology had been developed during their 2,000 years of isolation. It was far more advanced than anything the VRA had encountered. The Vrak's fleet moved toward Earth, confident in their overwhelming numbers. Then Yumi's special forces struck. Her teams had been waiting on asteroids and small moons throughout the system. They used small attack craft to board Vera's ships, cutting through hull plating with advanced weapons and entering through airlocks before the enemy knew what was happening. VRA soldiers had never faced close quarters combat. They fought from range with overwhelming firepower, but inside their own ships, in narrow corridors and tight spaces, they discovered that humans excelled at a completely different type of warfare. Young Mi led her team through the largest Vrax carrier. Her soldiers moved like shadows, using speed and coordination to overwhelm defenders. Within minutes, they reached the ship's reactor core and planted explosives. All teams fall back, she ordered. Her people retreated to their attack craft and fled the carrier just as the explosives detonated. The massive ship split in half, its reactor going critical and creating a chain reaction that damaged 3 nearby vessels. The VRA fleet fell into chaos. They couldn't find the invisible human ships. Their largest vessels were being destroyed from inside. Every tactical advantage they relied on was useless. Hayanu ordered the full fleet to attack. Earth ships emerged from stealth and struck with weapons the Vraks had never seen. Rail guns that fired solid metal at relativistic speeds, missiles that tracked targets through multiple dimensions, energy weapons that could cut through shields, designed to stop anything the galaxy currently used. 2,000 years of isolation meant 2,000 years of weapons development. The battle raged for 6 hours. The Vraks fleet tried to retreat, but Hyan-Su had positioned ships to block every escape route. This wasn't just a defensive battle, it was a statement. When the fighting ended, 200 VR ships were destroyed or captured. Remaining 100 fled in disorder, many too damaged to fight. Earth had lost 12 ships and 3,000 people. The cost was high, but they had won. Hunu broadcast a message across all VRA frequencies. This is Commander Hunu of Earth. You came to exterminate us like you did thousands of years ago. You failed then and you failed now. Tell your leaders that humanity remembers. We remember the old war. We remember running and hiding, but we're done running. If you want war, we'll bring it to your doorstep. across the galaxy, species that had been conquered by the Vrax listened to that broadcast. Hope began to spread like fire through dry grass. The impossible had happened. Someone had not just survived a Vrax attack but had destroyed them completely. The ancient rumors were more than true. Humans weren't just warriors. They were the warriors that even conquerors feared. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so divided. Ambassador Jai Wu stood at the center platform and watched as species that had lived in peace for centuries now shouted at each other with raw anger. The victory at Earth had changed everything. But not everyone was happy about it. You started a war, Council Leader Van accused, pointing at Jiu with a crystalline finger. The Vras were willing to negotiate. Now they're mobilizing their full military force. They were never willing to negotiate, Jai Wu replied calmly. They conquer and enslave. That's all they know. We simply refused to be victims. Half the council members stood and applauded. The other half remained seated with expressions of fear and anger. The alliance was fracturing before it could even form properly. Ambassador Minso watched from the side gallery. She had spent weeks trying to build individual alliances with different species, but progress was slow. Some species wanted to join humanity's fight against the Vrax. Others were terrified that humans would become the next conquerors, and a few secretly supported the Vra, hoping to gain favor by opposing Earth. After the council session ended in chaos, Minso returned to her private quarters. She found a message waiting on her secure channel. Someone had tried to poison her water supply, the third assassination attempt. This month, she deleted the message and moved to her backup quarters. This was the reality of galactic politics. Not everyone wanted humanity to succeed. Meanwhile, on the front lines, Major Tammen led a joint task force of human and alien soldiers. The council had finally agreed to send military support, but working together proved difficult. Different species had different tactics, different weapons, and different ideas about how war should be fought. We need to hold this position for 48 hours, Tammen explained to his officers. The task force defended a supply station that fed 3 colony worlds. If they lost it, millions would starve. A Koran officer whose species looked like armored beetles clicked his mandibles in disagreement. My people fight in tight formations. Your humans spread out too much. This strategy is inefficient. Your tight formations are efficient until the enemy uses area weapons, Tammen said. Then you lose entire units at once. We spread out to minimize casualties. You fight like cowards. Tam stepped closer to the Corvan officer. We fight to win. There's a difference between courage and stupidity. I'll teach you that difference if you're willing to learn. The Corvan officer stared at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Show me. Over the next 2 days, Tammen taught the joint task force how humans approached warfare, flexibility instead of rigid doctrine, adaptation instead of following old tactics, trusting soldiers to make decisions instead of waiting for orders from above. When the Vrax attacked the supply station, they expected the usual response, defenders forming lines and fighting until they were overwhelmed. Instead, they found an enemy that moved like water flowing around their attacks and striking from unexpected angles. The Corvan officer watched in amazement as human soldiers coordinated with his troops, where Korans provided heavy firepower and strong defense. Humans provided speed and adaptability. Together they held the station against forces that should have crushed them. On the other side of the galaxy, Sergeant Quango led a battalion defending a critical space bridge. The bridge allowed faster-than-light travel between two major sectors, and the Vraks needed it to move their reinforcements. Quanho's orders were simple: hold for 1 week while Council forces prepared a counterattack. His battalion numbered 3,000 soldiers against a Vraks force estimated at over 50,000. These are bad odds, his second-in-command said. Quango smiled. I've seen worse. The Vra attacked in waves, sending thousands of soldiers in drop pods toward the space bridge defense platforms. Quanho's battalion met them with concentrated fire and clever tactics. They used the bridge egg structure as cover, turning corridors into kill zones and airlocks into traps. Days became a blur of constant combat. Quango barely slept, moving from position to position to inspire his soldiers. When ammunition ran low, they used captured Vras weapons. When those ran out, they fought with whatever they could find. On the 7th day, as promised, Council reinforcements arrived, but by then Quanho's battalion had held for 3 weeks, not 7 days, 3 weeks. Of the 3,000 soldiers who started the defense, only 800 remained. But they had destroyed over 30,000 VR troops and bought enough time for the Council to organize a proper counterattack. When reporters asked Quanho how he did it, his answer spread across the galaxy like wildfire: "We're human, we don't know how to quit." Back on Earth, Intelligence Officer Jung made a disturbing discovery. He had been tracking Vra's fleet movements and found patterns that didn't make sense. The VRs were receiving intelligence about Council movements before they happened. Someone was feeding them information. There was a traitor in the Council. Jung brought his findings to Jai Wu, who immediately took them to the Council leadership. But instead of investigating, the Council tried to suppress the information. They were afraid of what they might find, afraid that the alliance was already broken beyond repair. This is exactly what the Vraks want, Jai Wu told Minso in a private meeting. They want us divided and suspicious of each other. If we turn on ourselves, they win without firing another shot. So what do? Mio asked. We find the traitor ourselves and we do it quietly. While Minso and her team investigated, more species began joining the human alliance. They had seen Quango stand. They had heard about Taman's joint task force succeeding where others failed. They watched as humanity taught the galaxy something it had forgotten: how to fight for something bigger than themselves. The humans introduced concepts that seemed strange to species that had known only peace. Ideas like no soldier left behind and hold the line in victory or death. These weren't just tactics, they were philosophies about what it meant to be a warrior. But with each new ally came new risks. The Vras grew desperate as their conquered territories began to rebel. If the rebellion spread, their entire empire would collapse. Jiang discovered through his investigation that the Vra feared humanity not because of their weapons or tactics, but because of what they represented. Thousands of years ago, humans had shown conquered species that resistance was possible. The Vraks had spent centuries erasing that memory from galactic history. Now humanity had returned to do it again. Elder Vayoth, who had first spoken of the ancient rumors, came to Jiu with an old data crystal. I found this in the deepest archives. It's a message from your ancestors to the Vra sent right before they disappeared. Jiu played the message. A human voice, ancient and distorted by time, spoke in clear tones. You can drive us away, but you cannot make us forget. We will return someday. And when we do, we'll finish what we started. Freedom cannot be killed. It only sleeps. Jiu looked at Vayoth. They knew, our ancestors knew we would come back, and now you have, Vayoth said. Question is, will you finish what they started? Jiu smiled. We're humans. What do you think? The Vrax Collective launched their final offensive with over 1,000 warships, every vessel they could spare, every soldier they could arm, every weapon they had built. They aimed straight for the Council's central worlds, where the galactic government had stood for 10,000 years. If those worlds fell, the Alliance would collapse completely. Commander Hyansu watched the enemy fleet approach on tactical displays. Earth's combined forces with their allies numbered only 400 ships. Mathematics were simple and brutal. Would lose. The Council wants us to retreat, Tammin reported from his station. He had been promoted to colonel after his success with the Joint Task Forces. They say we should preserve our forces and defend individual systems. Instead, that's how you lose slowly. Hunu said, we either stop them here or we don't stop them at all, Ambassador. Jiu stood beside him in the command center. She wasn't military, but she had earned her place here through months of tireless diplomacy. The Allies are asking what the plan is. They need hope, Hayano. They need to believe we can win. Hyansu looked at the display showing the massive Vrax fleet. Then he looked at another screen showing a young officer named Sang Wu presenting a tactical proposal. Next to that screen, scientist Yunji was explaining something about Vra's neural networks. I think I might have a plan, Hunu said slowly, but it's going to cost us. Thanks for watching. 3 days earlier, Unjai had discovered something remarkable while studying captured Vra equipment. The Vra used a hive mind command system. Individual ships had some autonomy, but major tactical decisions came from a central command vessel. If that vessel was destroyed, the entire fleet would fall into chaos for several minutes while backup systems took over. Several minutes doesn't sound like much, Jaiwu had said when Yunji first presented her findings. In a battle this size, several minutes is everything, Hyansu replied. If we can create that gap, we can split their fleet and defeat them piece by piece. The problem was reaching the command vessel. It would be protected at the center of 1,000 warships, surrounded by layers of shields and defense platforms. Getting a strike force through would be nearly impossible. Lieutenant S. Wu volunteered immediately. My team can do it. We and LT Unk and GT LL use stealth fighters and speed to get through their lines. It's a suicide mission, Tammin said bluntly. Even if you reach the command ship, you'll never make it back out. Sang Wu smiled. Then I guess you'll have to make our sacrifice count. Yumi and LT Unk and GTS Special Forces volunteered to support Sang Wu and LT Unk and GTS mission. Sergeant Quang Ho, now famous across the galaxy for his 3-week stand, requested to lead the diversionary attack that would draw Vara's attention away from the strike Team, the pieces were in place. Now they just needed to execute. The Battle of the Council Worlds began when the Vra fleet entered weapons range. Their opening salvo destroyed 15 Allied ships. Immediately, the firepower was overwhelming, exactly as expected. Hyan Su ordered the Allied fleet to form a defensive sphere around the Council's most important planets. It looked like a desperate last stand, which was exactly what he wanted the Vrax to think. Kwang Ho led his forces straight into the Vra fleet western flank. His ships and soldiers fought with the ferocity that had made humans legendary. They didn't try to win, they tried to hurt the Vrax as much as possible. Before dying, the Vrax couldn't ignore such an aggressive attack. They diverted forces to crush Quango's battalion exactly as planned, while the Vrax focused on Kwang Ho, Sang Woo and LT Unk and GTS. Strike Force launched from hidden positions. 20 stealth fighters, each carrying a pilot and enough explosives to destroy capital ship. They moved through the battle like ghosts, avoiding sensors and flying through debris fields. The Allied fleet fought desperately to hold the Vra attention. Ships exploded every minute. Thousands died every hour, but they held the line, buying time for Swu to reach his target. Tammen commanded the joint task forces, coordinating attacks from dozens of different species. The Korvans held the center with their heavy ships. Fast alien fighters harassed the Vra flanks. Human vessels used their advanced weapons to strike at critical targets. It was chaos, but it was coordinated chaos. Sang Woo and LT Unk and GTS team reached the inner defense sphere around the Vra command vessel. 3 fighters had been destroyed along the way. 17 remained. They accelerated to maximum speed and charged straight at the massive command ship. Point defense systems tracked them immediately. Sang Woo watched his teammates die one by one as Vra's weapons found their marks. 10 fighters left, then 7, then 5. Breakthrough, Sang Woo shouted over the comm. Don't stop for anything. His fighter took a hit that destroyed his left wing, but he kept flying on momentum alone. 2 fighters remained beside him. Together they crashed through the command ship's weakened shields and slammed directly into its hull. The explosives detonated simultaneously. The blast tore through the command vessel's central core, destroying the neural network that controlled the Vra fleet. For exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, every VR ship fell silent. Hayano saw it on his displays. The enemy fleet stopped moving in coordination. Ships drifted without purpose. Weapons stopped firing in organized patterns. All forces attack now, he ordered. Hit them before they recover. The Allied fleet struck like a hammer. They focused fire on the confused VR vessels, destroying dozens before the backup systems activated. But even when the VR recovered, they had lost their advantage. Kwan Ho's forces, reduced to less than 100 soldiers, made one final push. They boarded a Vrax carrier and destroyed it from the inside, just as Yumi had taught them. Quango himself died in the reactor room, setting the final charges that would tear the massive ship apart. His last words over the comm were, "Make it count." Battle raged for another 6 hours. Vrax fought hard, but without their command vessel and central coordination, they couldn't match the Allied forces' flexibility and determination. Ships that would have followed orders to the death now broke formation and retreated. When they took heavy damage, when it ended, over half the Vra fleet was destroyed. The remainder scattered across the galaxy, fleeing in disorder. The Council world stood intact, defended by an alliance that had learned to fight together, but the cost was terrible. Earth lost 100 ships and 20,000 people. Allied forces lost even more. Sang Wu and his entire strike team were gone. Quan H. Go and most of his famous battalion were dead. Young Mi had survived but lost half her special forces. Jiu walked through the memorial hall where names of the dead were displayed on walls of light. Elderv found her there. Your species paid a heavy price. Your species paid a heavy price. Freedom always costs something, Jiu said. Quietly, our ancestors knew that. Now we know it too. The Council will formally recognize Earth as a member state, Vayath said, with full military authority to protect the galaxy. The vote was unanimous. Jiu looked at the names on the walls. Sang Wu, Quang Ho, thousands of others. They earned that recognition. Not us, they earned it by being human. Vayath corrected, by showing the galaxy what courage really means. Across the galaxy the news spread. The Vrax collective was broken. Their conquered worlds were rebelling. Their empire was collapsing, and it had all started because humanity refused to surrender. New rumors began spreading, replacing the old ones. Humans weren't demons. They were guardians, protectors, warriors who fought not for conquest but for freedom. Tamon stood on the bridge of his new command ship and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, former Vra slaves were tasting freedom for the first time. Somewhere, species that had lived in fear were learning to stand up for themselves. And somewhere the next generation of humans was learning the lessons that would keep the peace their ancestors had died to create. What are you thinking? Mio asked, joining him at the viewport. I'm thinking about the message Sang Wu sent right before his mission, Tam said. He said that humans don't fight because we love war. We fight because we love what's worth protecting. That's a good reason, Mio said. It's the only reason that matters. The ancient rumors had been true, but they told only half the story. Yes, humans knew war. Yes, they were dangerous and adaptable and refused to surrender, but they were also something the galaxy had forgotten. They were willing to sacrifice everything for something bigger than themselves. From ancient rumors to warriors, humanity had entered the battle, and in doing so, they had reminded the galaxy what it meant to be truly free.